Unit 7. Genetically modified food. What's for dinner? It used to be that the answer to that household question was an issue for debate among family members only, but not anymore. Now, scientists, advocacy groups, economists, trade experts, geneticists, and politicians are all discussing what should be served for dinner. The food first revolves around one phrase: genetic modification. There are two groups with strong views on both sides of that phrase. One side argues that genetic modification of food enhances the quality and nutritional value of already existing foods, as well as generating new ways to produce that food. The other side questions the technology's safety and long-term effects, arguing that people simply don't know what they are putting in their mouth. The term genetically modified (GM) is an offspring of another term, biotechnology, a word that's been around for about 30 years. Biotechnology was created in the shadow of new techniques that allowed scientists to modify the genetic material in living cells. Basically, that means playing around with various biological processes to produce substances that arguably benefit things like agriculture, medicine, and the environment. If you know how to cut and paste on a computer, you've figured out genetic modification. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency describes it like this: it all begins with a cells made up of chromosomes. The chromosomes are made up of DNA and are organized into sections called genes. Genes determine the characteristic of an organism. These genes can be cut from an organism and pasted into another. Several foods that people eat every day are products of this process, such as tomatoes that ripen on the vine and maintain their texture and tough skin for several weeks. A potato plant developed to resist an insect known to attack it is another example. To the later case, the GM version eliminates the need for chemicals, pesticides. Proponents of GM foods argue using biotechnology in the production of food products has many benefits. It speeds up the process of breeding plants and animals with desired characteristics, can be used to introduce new characteristics that a product wouldn't normally have, and can improve the nutritional value of products. And, say the supporters, all of this is done safely. Groups who advocate against the use of GM foods don't see things quite the same way. They point to studies that argue GM food could be harmful to people's health. To the groups of this side of the issue, that could provide more than enough reason to go forward with extreme caution, something they say isn't currently being done. Critics say not enough time has passed to study the long-term effects of the foods. In Europe, hardly a week goes without some headline about GM foods, or rather, Frankenfoods, as they've been called the European media. The Church of England has entered the debate, criticizing the production of GM crops ever responsive to consumer demands. The European Union has taken a strong position on this issue, going so far as to propose a moratorium on approving GM food. These responses are outcome of a grassroots campaign. Various scares, the best known being mad cow disease, have consumers the Europe cautious of food genetically alter the kill pest or resist herbicides. Two British food companies have even dropped GM ingredients from their products, something the North American branches of these companies haven't done. That's not all that surprising for one simple reason. There's an unmistakable split in the policies toward GM foods between the two sides of the Atlantic that some call the Atlantic Divide. Supporters argue North America's approach is more progressive, while skeptics argue it's less safe. Whatever the case, the Atlantic Divide can be attributed to two things. The first is all about experience. The North American side of the Atlantic hasn't seen a scare comparable to mad cow disease. The second is all about dollars. North Americans expect their food to be cheap, and while the Atlantic may divide the approach to GM foods, it doesn't stop the two sides from butting heads. The first overfoot extends to whether the manufacturing process is made known. Canada has adopted both mandatory and voluntary labeling policy. According to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, mandatory labeling applies to all foods that have been changed nutritionally or compositionally, or to alert consumers to possible allergens. That doesn't mean, though, that all GM foods will be labeled. If it can be shown through tests that the nutrition or composition of such foods remains unchanged, no special label is required. Even though labels are not required, they are allowed, but only when truthful and not misleading. A good example of the fat-free claims made on some products because of the ambiguity surrounding voluntary labeling. It's been determined that clearer rules are needed. The GM debate makes us consider the role technology has in our lives. What makes this debate unique is that every meal we eat is at its very core. And that what means one thing is an issue that will be discussed not only around policy tables but dinner tables as well. Thanks for listening.